All right, today we are talking about baseball. We are in the midst of the World Series.
Woo! Let's go Dodgers.
Let's go Dodgers. Clearly, let's go Dodgers. We're Southern California folks. It's been great at our household. We have small kids, and they're excited. We had some neighbors over with their small kids. Got to see the walk-off grand slam.
Oh my word! By Freddie Freeman, it was epic. I think our neighbors heard us screaming. It was so fun.
So fun. So we're enjoying it, but we're recording this right now. We're still in the midst of the World Series. We don't know the end of it yet.
We just finished Game 4. And
three games to 1. Yeah, it was a big game last night. So what we want to talk about today, kind of taking the economic side, is Ohtani's contract. I mean, there's been so much buzz and there's a lot of articles out there, but we just thought it'd be fun to kind of talk through Ohtani. And there's a few other baseball players that had some really interesting contracts. And what does that mean for money? Yep. Like, what does that mean for the team?
From a tax perspective.
Yeah, right. How to make taxes fun with Dodgers. So we try to wear, I guess, a little bit of Dodger blue. You got a little bit on. But
got a little touch of Dodger blue, a little hint of Dodger blue in preparation for our recording today. I remember the news articles and the press release when Ohtani signed this contract. Now, I am not necessarily an avid baseball fanatic, but I have been drawn into this world by a nephew who is a diehard fan of the Dodgers, and we have a staff person who loves the Dodgers and follows every move they make. So Ohtani signs the largest contract to date in MLB history, $700 million.
$700 million. But there's a few caveats and asterisks for people to look at. So the first one is it's not just a $700 million check. What he's done is he's deferred most of the contract in the future. So he's getting paid $2 million a year for the next 10 years.
For 10 years. So 2024 to 2034, $2 million a year.
Yep. Living off of that, all the things he needs to do, he has $2 million. And then at the end of the 10 years, it shifts and he starts getting $68 million a year for the next 10 years after that. And when you add all that up, it's $700 million. But the interesting thing with that is when you actually add it up, it is $700 million. There's not an interest or appreciation or depreciation that's going to be included here. And most people, when they defer money like that, they agree to some interest rate. Oh, you're paying me 3%, or you think of your mortgage, right? You make payments over time and you have to pay some amount of interest.
Because inflation is real. So the reality is that $700 million today, the present value of that $700 million in terms of real things that you could purchase with it is going to be different than 20 years from now when he starts getting this payout, right?
When he's fully paid out. And part of the conversation is, why would he do this? And of course I wasn't there, but one thought is that maybe the contract deal was really going to be, say, $400 million. Still a massive amount of money, but much lower. And with the ability to defer it, the ability to pay it later, they were able to, without interest, they were able to move up that principle and say, well, we'll pay you this much more. It'll make headlines. It'll do all these other things. So maybe that's true, right? Maybe it was only a $600 million contract.
The other benefit by deferring the income until a later date is that he frees up cash flow for the Dodgers as an organization in the present. So not only did they sign this contract with Shohei Ohtani, but now they still have the additional cash flow currently to maybe write other large contracts.
Yeah. And some they already have. I mean, they have a huge pitching bench. Mookie Betts is already on the team. They have a number of other superstars. And so it's interesting, whether he made this choice and negotiate this contract for the sake of the team. Hey, I want a lot, but I'm willing to push mine out. Whether it was a tax play, and we haven't talked about that yet, but to say if he's living and playing in Los Angeles, that means he has to pay U.S. federal income tax. He's going to be at a very high rate. He also has to pay California income tax, which could be depending where you get 13, 14% or so at the highest brackets. Those are big chunks out of it. Right. So part of this could be, and I don't know if it is, but it could be a plan to say, I'm going to play for the Dodgers, maybe for the next decade, make money, pay my taxes, or any other team he plays for. But then maybe he's planning to move to a state in the U.S. that doesn't have income tax. There's a number around the country. Or he's planning to move out of the country and move to someplace else. And the general structure, there's all sorts of loopholes and things. You have to always talk to a tax advisor specifically. But generally, where you're living at the time that you receive the income, receive it when you get it, is generally the place that would tax you on it. Like I said, there's loopholes to that. But the idea is if he were to move out of California and live, say, in Arizona, where they don't have an income tax, perhaps he's able to receive those larger payments without California taking their bite of that. And California might not like that. And I imagine there would be an effort to go after him in some way.
Right. The law is not, from what I understand, crystal clear on this. There's been different situations because there are other scenarios of deferred income like this.
Yep.
And employers do this for a number of different reasons. One, like we talked about before, is to free up current cash flow so they can invest those funds and do a larger payout in the end. That naturally incentivizes employees to stay for a longer amount of time. So sometimes it can be an incentive for retention. But I guess, topic at play here is how that deferred income is viewed. Is it viewed as a retirement benefit? And so the state at which you live in might be different than at the time that you were employed. So arguably you earned that income when you were living in state number 1, but you didn't receive it until you're living in state number 2. And that can have a dramatic impact on the taxes owed on that lump sum. 68 million, 14%. I've got to do that calculation, but that's not a small chunk of change.
Well, I mean, 10 million or 10%, right? That's 6.8. So we're getting
plus
close.
The federal. So just back of the napkin, quick calculation, it's about 50% that would actually float to you. So 34 million. Right? I mean, obviously Ohtani's not hurting, but he's paying half of that to Uncle Sam.
That's right. Well, and to put this in, Uncle Sam and Uncle California. I'm not sure how you call them.
They're brothers.
Yeah, I get it. Must be. But with that, you think of put this in kind of normal business terms that people understand. Your 401k or your IRA, that's money that you earned at one point and put into an account. Well, there's some federal laws and some clarity on that if you leave the state and you move to a new state and you start taking from your 401k or your IRA, the state in which you earn that money has no claims to now tax you even though you've moved away. That one's fairly clear. But there's a lot of people who have stock options or have phantom stock. It feels like stock, but it's not really stock. If those people change states and then later in life are able to receive this income, how will that get taxed? There's some questions there. There's some gray areas. So I think Otani,
it can be arguably seen as deferred income, and that income was earned in state number 1, of which the state that you lived in when you were employed and when you were given that benefit. So it's a really
questionable. Yeah.
Questionable.
So if Otani were to be with the Dodgers, say for the rest of his career and retire and move to another country, what would happen exactly? I think it's a question mark. I'm sure he's got good counsel that have kind of walked through that with him, but that's a fun one. The other, I guess, baseball themed contract I want to bring in is Bobby Bonilla. People who are fans, especially back in the 2000s, will remember this. He played for the Mets, and they have July 1st in New York often is Bobby Bonilla Day, because he gets a check every year on July 1st for around $1 million, a bit more than $1 million. But it comes back to an interesting story. Back in 2011, he was finishing up his contract and the Mets needed to buy him out. So it was a $6 million that they owed him. So rather than writing a check to him, he agreed to let them write it over years, until 2035. So 2011 to 2035, pay it out in installments. So delaying it and deferring it. But he was able to negotiate getting an 8% increase on those funds every year, those payments. And at the time, looking back, why would they do this? And what's come out to is he's received, or will receive by the end of it, roughly $30 million more than what he would have received had he just taken the money. And an 8% return over that time period every year is a wonderful return. So there's speculation that the Mets were working with Bernie Madoff, perhaps, that he was their investment manager. So
Yikes.
they thought 8%, we could do that. That's easy. We get more than that every year. Let's agree to 8%.
Right.
But Bobby Bonilla looking like a brilliant guy, because one, he didn't blow all his money like other athletes do. But every year he gets a very sizable check. And over his lifetime, he will receive meaningfully more than he would have had he just taken the payout. And for him, it's interesting as well. If he were to move states, which states would try and tax him each year on what he's receiving? It's an interesting question. I'm sure he's had to walk through that already. But these baseball contracts, specifically, Otani deferring payment with no interest, Bobby Bonilla deferring payment, but getting very, I would say, meaningful interest. It's just very interesting of how sports have developed in this.
Yeah, and it would be so interesting to be a fly on the wall in the midst of these negotiations. I remember not too long ago switching sports here, but we watched the documentary on Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan regards his contract negotiation terms in comparison to Scottie Pippen's. And, I recall that Jordan's contract was more favorable. And so even though they both rose in the sort of glory days of the Chicago Bulls, Scottie Pippen's benefit was incremental compared to Michael Jordan's. And there was no way that he could unwind that contract. And so, I mean, I guess maybe a takeaway for our listeners is if you or one of your children are an aspiring professional athlete, you got to get the right people in that room for the negotiation terms, because I don't think you get to unwind it. And, there's lots of different ways to look at Ohtani's contract. In one way, he has provided an interest-free loan to the Dodgers, of which it's payable $2 million a year and then kind of a balloon payment structure of $68 million starting in the year 2034. And so when we look at kind of the present value of that contract, what we saw smattered across the news headlines was $700 million, but the present value is much smaller. And so the Dodgers could take that impact at this time and still publicize the fact that they signed the biggest contract in Major League Baseball. So
and some of that, how much of that is marketing, how much of that is strategic, and how much of that is just the deal they were able to work out, right?
Right.
Almost maybe perhaps they even fell into that to say, well, I don't need the money now. Let's push it later. I don't know. And I think for Ohtani, it provides a really good safety net. I think there's so many young athletes that get these big signing bonuses, these big amounts of money. And as they're still getting their feet wet of being used to working with those kind of sums, as well as trying to succeed in their sport, they can be taken advantage of. They can make poor choices. They think, hey, I'm going to buy a couple of houses for my family members. And then there's been a number of articles of folks who get into trouble, trouble with the IRS, trouble with just running out of money. So if nothing else, he will have, $2 million a year, which will be taxed on. He'll live on, but it's going to give him a number of years to figure out what to do with his money, how to be prepared for it. So when he starts receiving these very large sums 10 years from now, man, I hope he's got a great team with him that helps utilize those funds for him and his family in a really healthy way.
I mean, one of the things, I don't know if this was part of the thought process again, was that, Ohtani's not hurting for endorsement deals right now. So while he's in his kind of glory days, again, to use that term, he's going to have contracts coming his direction for endorsements, eventually when he retires, training and coaching and et cetera. So he can leverage potentially more income in the next 10 years for himself outside of the Dodgers contract. Yep, and kind of save that for 10 years from now. So
yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, we see him on ads already. And even the Ohtani shirts, I think initially the Dodger jerseys with Ohtani on it, I mean, they sold out a number of times initially trying to get that because people were so interested. And even the tourism, I think, from overseas, people coming to the U.S. to see Ohtani play is meaningful. I mean, there's Ohtani and Yamamoto are both playing on the Dodgers in the World Series right now. And I think that's a huge draw internationally.
Right. We're seeing, they call it the Otani effect. We're seeing so many tourists from Japan come in to watch him play. So one of the things that naturally comes up too is his citizenship. Where does he owe taxes on this money?
Yeah, right. I mean, everyone who's like living and working in the United States owes taxes in the United States initially. But then there's all these tax treaties that are very specific between countries. And so Ohtani, if he were to, spend the summer in, I believe his home country is Japan, but I'm not sure how he holds his citizenship. He may have dual citizenship or just Japanese citizenship. If he were to spend summers, what does that count for? If he were to spend, once he retired, if he moved to Japan full time, if he either had U.S. citizenship or renounced it, right? All that would be different of how he would be taxed potentially in the future. And imagine even just the tax quandary if he decides to move to London. Right, he was born, Japanese, worked in the United States, and then retires in London. Everyone's going to.
Now we're getting real complex.
Right,
you would definitely need an international estate planning specialist.
Right. And I think everyone would try and take a slice. That's the hard part with a contract that big. Every state, or every country is probably going to say, "Oh yeah, you owe us," and he's probably have to fight a lot of that to get through it.
Right, because as our listeners may or may not know, if you hold U.S. citizenship, it doesn't matter where your assets are held, you are liable for taxes. Broad brushstroke. There are, like you said, individual rules between countries, etc. Broad brushstroke is if you are a U.S. citizen, even if you're not living in the U.S., no matter where you earn your income or hold your assets, you're potentially liable for taxes on all of it. The U.S. says if you continue to be eligible to receive our benefits, government-provided benefits, then you have to continue to be a taxpayer.
And there's all sorts of credits, of course, for taxes paid overseas and for different things. But we have a number of clients that they have to declare each year. They have to declare foreign held bank accounts. Yep. So to say, I have funds in other countries, and they have to report that as part of their their normal tax reporting. So I think citizenship is interesting. That's a question for what he has now, what he'll have in the future. Mm-hmm. The other, man, I think the risks that he could have, on one side, we think all the wonder of, man, there's gonna be so much money coming in. This is so great. But you think for a moment, if the Dodgers hit a really, really rough patch, right? They fall from glory perhaps and go through that. And then all of a sudden the $68 million a year payment, becomes due. And what if they can't make it? I mean,
right. What if the Dodgers fall into bankruptcy? Ohtani, get in line. You're one of the creditors waiting to get paid out if they liquidate.
Right. And I guess the bet on this would be that you said the Ohtani effect between, the actual ticket seats, the money coming to the Dodgers, the viewers on the eyeballs, right, on the TV, all the advertising dollars, and all the co-branding that the Dodgers can do, that is going to promote and generate enough money that they'll be able to fund all these future payments. And that might very well happen. It might not. So there's a risk there. I can't imagine he has security of real estate or something, but other than just a contract.
Right. One of the parts of his contract that I haven't seen exposed in any of the articles is kind of the what if in the event of injury. So we saw this in the football or soccer international industry when Beckham got traded and then got injured. Ohtani injured his shoulder in the third game of the World Series. So, what if he suffered a major injury and was no longer able to play? Right. And I don't know what the terms of his contract state, but tourism falls off, the endorsement deals fall off. They're not able to co-brand things, jerseys, or anything else. What impact does that have on his future payout?
That's a great risk. And in the realistic, and that's a great one. And I think another one is also just being traded. Say he just doesn't perform, not injured, still playing, but just not doing all the things that everyone expected him to do, and he gets traded to another team. Does the other team have to buy out that contract? Do the Dodgers still owe that? It's interesting. The other risk I see is just in the future. Man, imagine him getting back to, say, Japan. I could imagine every real estate investor, every financial advisor, everyone coming around.
Private equity.
We would love to help you invest that money, put Ohtani on their building, say, we work with Ohtani. Right. So he's going to have, I think, some risks of just knowing who to trust and knowing who his team is. And maybe this gives him some good runway, some time to put those people in place. But when I think of if we had a client receiving that kind of money, what they would do with it, well, of course, they're going to have, stock market exposure. Of course, they have real estate exposure, trying to, set their family up for future generations. But man, I bet there's a lot of people who are going to come in saying, I can help. And most of them are probably legitimate, wanting to do business with them. But I bet there's a number that would be looking to take advantage of somebody and say, hey, I would like access to those funds as well.
Right. Like if Ohtani was our client, or if one of our clients won the lottery and they came to us and they said, I'm going to get paid out, $68 million next year, of which I'm only going to net about $34 million. What do I do with it? My first questions to them would be, what are your income needs? What are your desires to do with that money, both now and into the future? So then we build an investment portfolio that pairs with what the cash flow needs are. When are they going to need that money? What is for long-term investment, intermediate, and immediate liquidity needs? And then the other thing is diversification, beyond investment in, a stock portfolio, bond portfolio. You want to look at real estate and other holdings and real property, same thing as real estate, commercial buildings, businesses, right? There's a lot of different investment avenues out there. And so that same idea of diversification to build stability in a portfolio, I think would still apply in this scenario.
Well, and having even a second and third career, we'll see where Ohtani goes, but Magic Johnson's a great example. He played a basketball career, but then he went into franchises. And I don't know what the number is, but I think he owns over 100 different franchises, McDonald's and all sorts of different Starbucks and all sorts of different franchise models that he is, massively increased his wealth and his family's wealth, not just from what he earned from basketball, but what he did with those funds after basketball. Yep. And this would be the same thing with Ohtani. He's, have years of baseball, but then he'll probably have years of being able to use these resources for things outside of baseball. And whether he, starts companies, builds companies, sets his family up for all sorts of success. There's a lot to be done. And especially having 10 years of payouts, that's a lot of money that's going to come in over a period of time to really be mindful of what do you want this to build for him and for his future.
Right. I think there's a major opportunity for charitable giving. We see a lot of athletes provide an example to the future generation by investing in not for profits or starting nonprofits that do work that is near and dear to their heart. And so, that would be a topic of conversation, not just for the tax deduction, although that would be necessary with that high of income, but also, to put that money to work for good use and in the community. So that would be a fun conversation to have for sure.
Yeah, and even where he sees his community. I mean, there's so much of, say, the U.S., Japan, all over the place that he could be involved in doing such wonderful things. So it'd be fun to see. It'll be fun to see the rest of the games, as well as seeing what he does with his funds.
And I think the other benefit too, in terms of publicizing that large of a contract, is, a good old Reaganomics quote, but the rising tide floats all boats. And so what this might do is just increase opportunity for added incentive for other Major League Baseball players. We're seeing a trend of, added publicity and funds and endorsement deals flowing into women's basketball right now. I think about the impact that, on the golf industry, Tiger Woods had. And now the contracts that are written in the golf industry that were never even thought of before. So one person can have an impact on the overall industry. I won't say that prior to Ohtani, MLB was hurting in any way or underpaid, but it'll be interesting to see how this generates new contract deals into the future as well.
Yeah. So interesting. I'm glad we could talk through this. I mean, go Dodgers. We'll see how the rest of the World Series wraps up. But it's great to see the financial side of what the MLB and what these players are doing and how this may impact their future. So hopefully it's fun to listen to. We'll see how the World Series unravels.
Let's go Dodgers.
Let's go Dodgers.